Welcome, everyone. Good to see you all. So, to another reading stream, it's going to be a few of Edgar Allan Poe's shorter stories. I figured do it in kind of reverse to what I did with H.P. Lovecraft. To kind of start with the shorter stories and kind of work up, not exactly work up to, but like then read a longer story, which will most likely possibly be The Fall of the House of Usher, which is probably a bit more well known. I don't think too many people know. At least when it comes to Edgar Allan Poe, that he did actually write a couple or so mysteries. He did delve into the mystery genre, but he's better known for the the more horror side to his storytelling. So, I don't know if too many people have read The Murders in the Rue Morgue, but that is an Edgar Allan Poe story. So, but I'm going to be reading three of his shorter ones, and welcome everyone. And I do see your comments, Last Toxic Male. But I'm reading The Telltale Heart, which is actually the first Edgar Allan Poe story I ever remember reading. The Telltale Heart. Then The Masque of the Red Death, which is one of my favorites reading in school. And The Raven. So, I'm not sure, your question, isn't that a show now? So, but anyway. But I'm not sure about your question, Trey, if you're questioning, like, someone else in the chat, or what I just said. But welcome, again, everyone. Those are the three that I will be reading, so it might end up being, like, slightly shorter stream, because the stories themselves aren't long, but I wanted to end with The Raven, because it is a classic. It's kind of both considered a short story and a poem because of how it's written. It's not exactly written like a story. It's written more like the prose of a poem, but it's told like a story. So, like The Fall of the House of Usher, yeah. I don't know if it's a show. It might be a show, yeah. There's actually an Elvira spin on The Fall of the House of Usher. So I do know that one. Because somewhere I have a signed copy of that film. But Elvira did her own little spin on The Fall of the House of Usher. So somewhere that classic exists. I'm not saying that to be negative or anything. I actually do like that movie for what it is. But yeah. So if you have not watched that and you like Elvira, check that one out. But anyway. So we're going to start with The Telltale Heart. Well, it's Elvira, Citizen Ronan, of course. Of course there was. But anyway. So. Very Edgar Allan Poe imagery. Okay. True. Nervous. Very, very dreadfully nervous I had been and am. But why will you say that I am mad? The disease had sharpened my senses, not destroyed, not dulled them. Above all was the sense of hearing acute. I heard all things in the heaven and in the earth. I heard many things in hell. How then am I mad? Hearken and observe how healthily, how calmly I can tell you the whole story. It is impossible to say how first the idea entered my brain, but once conceived, it haunted me day and night. Object there was none. Passion there was none. I loved the old man. He had never wronged me. He had never given me insult. For his gold I had no desire. I think it was his eye. Yes, it was this. He had the eye of a vulture. A pale blue eye with a film over it. Whenever it fell upon me, my blood ran cold, and so by degrees, very gradually, I made up my mind to take the life of the old man, and thus rid myself of the eye forever. Now this is the point. You fancy me mad. Madmen know nothing, but you should have seen me. You should have seen how wisely I proceeded, with what caution, with what foresight, with what dissimulation I went to work. I was never kinder to the old man than during the whole week before I killed him. And every night, about midnight, I turned the latch of his door and opened it, oh so gently. And then, when I had made an opening sufficient for my head, I put in a dark lantern, all closed, that no light shone out, and then I thrust in my head. Oh, you would have laughed to see how cunningly I thrust it in. I moved it slowly, very, very slowly, so that I might not disturb the old man's sleep. It took me an hour to place my whole head within the opening so far that I could see him as he lay upon his bed. Huh, would a madman have been so wise as this? And then, when my head was well in the room, I undid the lantern cautiously. Oh, so cautiously, cautiously, for the hinges creaked. I undid it just so much that a single thin ray fell upon the vulture eye, and this I did for 7 long nights, every night just at midnight, but I found the eye always closed, and so it was impossible to do the work, for it was not the old man who vexed me, but his evil eye. And every morning when the day broke, I went boldly into the chamber and spoke courageously to him, calling him by name in a hearty tone, and inquiring how he has passed the night. So you see, he would have been a very profound old man indeed to suspect that every night, just at 12, I looked in upon him while he slept. Upon the 8th night, I was more than usually cautious in opening the door. A watch's minute hand moves more quickly than did mine. Never before that night had I felt the extent of my own powers, of my sagacity. I could scarcely contain my feelings of triumph. To think that there I was, opening the door little by little, and he not even to dream of my secret deeds or thoughts. I fairly chuckled at the idea, and perhaps he heard me, for he moved on the bed suddenly as if startled. Now you may think that I drew back, but no. His room was as black as pitch, with a thick darkness, for the shutters were close fastened through fear of robbers. And so I knew that he could not see the opening of the door, and I kept pushing it on steadily. Steadily. I had my head in, and was about to open the lantern when my thumb slipped upon the tin fastening, and the old man sprang up in bed, crying out, "Who's there?" I kept quite still and said nothing. For a whole hour I did not move a muscle, and in the meantime I did not hear him lie down. He was still sitting up in the bed listening, just as I have done, night after night, hearkening to the death watches in the wall. Presently, I heard a slight groan, and knew it was the groan of mortal terror. It was not a groan of pain or of grief. Oh no, it was a low, stifled sound that arises from the bottom of the soul when overcharged with awe. Welcome, everyone. Well, I believe it because, wasn't he born in Baltimore? Or, was he born in Baltimore, or did he just live there? I know Baltimore has a connection to Edgar Allan Poe. Sorry. I knew the sound well. Many a night, just at midnight, when all the world slept, it has welled up from my own bosom, deepening, with its dreadful echo, the terrors that distracted me. I say I knew it well. I knew what the old man felt and pitied him, although I chuckled at heart. I knew that he had been lying awake ever since the first slight noise, when he had turned in the bed. His fears had been ever since growing upon him. He lived here, okay. I knew there was a connection. He had been trying to fancy them causeless, but could not. He had been saying to himself, "It is nothing but the wind in the chimney. It is only a mouse crossing the floor. Or, it is merely a cricket which has made a single chirp." Yes, he had been trying to comfort himself with these suppositions, but he had found all in vain. All in vain, because death, and approaching him, had stalked with his black shadow before him, and enveloped the victim. And it was the mournful influence of the unperceived shadow that caused him to feel, although he neither saw nor heard, to feel the presence of my head within the room. When I had waited a long time, very patiently, without hearing him lie down, I resolved to open a very, very little crevice in the lantern. So I opened it. You cannot imagine how stealthily, until at length a simple dim ray, like the thread of the spider, shot from out of the crevice and fell full upon the vulture eye. It was open, wide, wide open, and I grew furious as I gazed upon it. I saw it with perfect distinctness, all a dull blue, with a hideous veil over it that chilled the very marrow in my bones. But I could see nothing else of the old man's face or person, for I had directed the ray as if by instinct, precisely upon the damned spot. And I have not told you that what you mistake for madness is but over-acuteness of the senses. Now, I say, there came to my ears a low, dull, quick sound, such as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I knew that sound well, too. It was the beating of the old man's heart. It increased my fury, as the beating of a drum stimulates a soldier into courage. But even But even yet I refrained and kept still. I scarcely breathed. I held the lantern motionless. I tried how steadily I could maintain the ray upon the eve. Meantime, the hellish tattoo of the heart increased. It grew quicker and quicker and louder every instant. The old man's terror must have been extreme. It grew louder, I say, louder every moment. Do you mark me well? I have told you that I am nervous. So I am. And now, at the dead hour of the night, amid the dreadful silence of that old house, so strange a noise as this excited me to uncontrollable terror. Yet for some minutes longer I refrained and stood still, but the beating grew louder, louder. I thought the heart must burst. And now a new anxiety seized me. The sound would be heard by a neighbor. The old man's hour had come. With a loud yell, I threw open the lantern and leaped into the room. He shrieked once, only once. In an instant, I dragged him to the floor and pulled the heavy bed over him. I then smiled gaily to find the deed so far done. But for many minutes, the heart beat on with a muffled sound. This, however, did not vex me. It would not be heard through the wall. At length, it ceased. The old man was dead. I removed the bed and examined the corpse. Yes, he was stone dead. I placed my hand upon the heart and held it there for many minutes. There was no pulsation. He was stone dead. His eye would trouble me no more. If still you think me mad, you will think so no longer when I describe the wise precautions I took for the concealment of the body. The night waned, and I worked hastily, but in silence. First of all, I dismembered the corpse. I cut off the head and the arms and the legs. I then took up 3 planks from the flooring of the chamber and deposited it all between the scantlings. I then replaced the board so cleverly, so cunningly that no human eye, not even his, could have detected anything wrong. There was nothing to wash out, no stain of any kind, no blood spot whatever. I had been too weary for that. A tub had caught all. Aha. When I had made an end of these labors, it was 4 o'clock, still dark as midnight. As the bell sounded the hour, there came a knocking at the street door. I went down to open it with a light heart, for what I had now to fear. There entered 3 men, who introduced themselves with perfect suavity as officers of the police. A shriek had been heard by a neighbor during the night. A suspicion of foul play had been aroused. Information had been lodged at the police office, and they, the officers, had been deputed to search the premises. I smiled, for what had I to fear? I bade the gentleman welcome. The shriek, I said, was my own in a dream. The old man, I mentioned, was absent in the country. I took my visitors all over the house. I bade them search well. I led them at length to his chamber. I showed them his treasures, secure, undisturbed. In the enthusiasm of my confidence, I brought chairs into the room and desired them here to rest from their fatigues, while I myself, in the wild audacity of my perfect triumph, placed my own seat upon the very spot beneath which reposed the corpse of the victim. The officers were satisfied. My manner had convinced them. I was singularly at ease. They sat, and while I answered cheerily, they chatted of familiar things. But ere long, I felt myself getting pale and wished them gone. My head ached. I fancied the ringing in my ears. But still they sat and still chatted. The ringing became more distinct. It continued and became more distinct. I talked more freely to get rid of the feeling, but it continued and gained definiteness, until at length I found that the noise was not within my ears. No doubt I now grew very pale, but I talked more fluently and with a heightened voice. Yet the sound increased, and what could I do? It was a low, dull, quick sound, much such a sound as a watch makes when enveloped in cotton. I gasped for breath, and yet the officers heard it not. I talked more quickly, more vehemently, but the noise steadily increased. I rose and argued about trifles, in a high key and with violent gesticulations, but the noise steadily increased. Why would they not be gone? I paced the floor to and fro with heavy strides, as if excited to fury by the observations of the men, but the noise steadily increased. Oh God, what could I do? I foamed, I raved, I swore. I swung the chair upon which I had been sitting and grated it upon the boards, but the noise arose all over and continually increased. It grew louder, 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 and still the men chatted pleasantly and smiled. Was it possible they heard not? Almighty God, no, no, They heard, they suspected, they knew, they were making a mockery of my horror. This I thought, and this I think. But anything was better than this agony. Anything was more tolerable than this derision. I could bear those hypocritical smiles no longer. I felt that I must scream or die, and now, again, hark, louder, 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 louder. Villains, I shrieked, dissemble no more. I admit the deed. Tear up the planks here, here. It is the beating of his hideous hearts. So he went mad. So is he mad? Is he not? I don't know. You heard something. So welcome everyone. That is the Telltale Heart. So, and now, the Masque of the Red Death. Okay. The Red Death had long devastated the country. No pestilence had ever been so fatal or so hideous. Blood was its avatar and its seal, the redness and the horror of blood. There were sharp pains and sudden dizziness, and then profuse bleeding at the pores with dissolution. The scarlet stains upon the body, and especially upon the face of the victim, were the pest ban which shut him out from the aid and from the sympathy of his fellow men. And the whole seizure, progress, and termination of the disease were the incidents of half an hour. But the Prince Prospero was happy and dauntless and sagacious. When his dominions were half depopulated, he summoned to his presence 1,000 hale and light-hearted friends from among the knights and dames of his court, and with these retired to the deep seclusion of one of his castelletted abbeys. This was an extensive and magnificent structure, the creation of the prince's own eccentric yet august taste. A strong and lofty, well girdled in. This wall had gates of iron. The courtiers, having entered, brought furnaces and massy hammers and welded the bolts. They resolved to leave means neither of ingress or egress to the sudden impulses of despair or of frenzy from within. The abbey was amply provisioned. With such precautions, the courtiers might bid defiance to contagion. The external world could take of itself. In the meantime, it was folly to grieve or to think. The prince had provided all the appliances of pleasure. There were buffoons, there were improvisatori, there were ballet dancers, there were musicians, there was beauty, there was wine. All these and security were within. Without was the Red Death. It was toward the close of the 6th or 7th month of his seclusion, and while the pestilence raged most furiously abroad, the Prince Prospero entertained his 1,000 friends at a massive ball of the most unusual magnificence. It was a voluptuous scene, that masquerade, but first let me tell of the rooms in which it was held. There were 7, and imperial suites. In many palaces, however, such suites form a long and straight vista, while the folding doors slide back nearly to the walls on either hand, so that the view of the whole extent is scarcely impeded. Here the case was very different, as might have been expected from the Duke's love of the bizarre. The apartments were so irregularly disposed that the vision embraced but little more than one at a time. There was a sharp turn at every 20 or 30 yards, and at each turn a novel effect. To the right and left, in the middle of each wall, a tall and narrow Gothic window looked out upon a closed corridor, which pursued the windings of the suites. These windows were of stained glass, whose color varied in accordance with the prevailing hue of the decorations of the chamber into which it opened. That at the eastern extremity was hung, for example, in blue, and vividly blue were its windows. The second chamber was purple in its ornaments and tapestries, and here the panes were purple. The third was green throughout, and so were the casements. The fourth was furnished and lighted with orange, the fifth with white, the sixth with violet. The seventh apartment was closely shrouded in black velvet tapestries that hung all over the ceiling and down the walls, falling in heavy folds upon a carpet of the same material and hue. Well, we're beginning to the Raven in a little bit. Dan Blackwood, welcome. Oh, and sorry, meant to say, I'm not expecting anyone to do this, but hopefully what I earn within the next 2 or 3 weeks in my PayPal account, if you choose to donate, through PayPal, I'm going to hopefully use towards returning to my goth phase. So, I would like to get my hair, I guess, re-gothified, so to speak, before Halloween. But welcome, everyone. Okay. But in this chamber only, the color of the windows failed to correspond with the decorations. The panes here were scarlet, a deep blood color. Sorry. Now in no one of the 7 apartments was there any lamp or candelabrum, amid the profusion of golden ornaments that lay scattered to and fro or depended from the roof. There was no light of any kind emanating from lamp or candle within the suite of chambers. Oh my god, man. But in the corridors that followed the suite, there stood, up opposite to each window, a heavy tripod bearing a brazier of fire that protected its rays through the tinted glass and so glaringly illuminated the room. Well, I was both, Soul. And thus were produced a multitude of gaudy and fantastic appearances. But in the western, or black chamber, the effect of the firelight that streamed upon the dark hangings through the blood-tinted panes was ghastly in the extreme, and produced a so wild look upon the countenances of those who entered, that there were few of the company bold enough to set foot within its precincts at all. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. This is my reading stream. Welcome, everyone, and thank you, Tara, for the message. Appreciate that. And, well, she's gonna have to live with that. Anyway, moving on. It was in this apartment, also, that there stood against the western wall a gigantic clock of ebony. And for those who are just joining, I'm reading Edgar Allen Poe tales, and the one I'm currently on is The Masque of the Red Death. Oh, I love it when my siblings text. Its pendulum swung to and fro with a dull, heavy, monotonous clang, and when the minute hand made the circuit of the face, and the hour was to be stricken, there came from the brazen lungs of the clock a sound which was clear and loud and deep and exceedingly musical, but of so peculiar a note and emphasis that, at each lapse of an hour, the musicians of the orchestra were constrained to pause momentarily in their performance to hearken to the sound, and thus the waltzers perforce ceased their evolutions, and there was a brief disconcert of the whole gay company. And while the chimes of the clock yet rang, it was observed that the giddiest grew pale, and the more aged and sedate passed their hands over their brows as if in confused reverie or meditation. But when the echoes had fully ceased, a light laughter at once pervaded the assembly. The musicians looked at each other and smiled as if at their own nervousness and folly, and made whispering vows, each to the other, that the next chiming of the clock should produce in them no similar emotion. And then, after the lapse of 60 minutes, which embraced 3,600 seconds of the time that flies, there came yet another chiming of the clock, and then were the same disconcert and tremulous and meditation as before. How about this, chat? If Steph doesn't want me to be a circle, where's that comment from, Tizen Ronan? Did Steph say that? I don't drive a Subaru. But if Steph doesn't want me to be a circle, donate to my PayPal so Gothmara can return. And then maybe I'll go back to a square or a rectangle. Alright? But yeah, there's my PayPal account in the pinned comment, whatever I earn. Hopefully before Halloween, I'm going to use towards my hair going back to my more goth look. But in spite of these things, it was a gay and magnificent revel. The tastes of the Duke were peculiar. He had a fine eye for colors and effects. He disregarded the decora of mere fashion. His plans were bold and fiery, and his conceptions glowed with barbaric luster. There are some who would have thought him mad. His followers felt that he was not. It was necessary to hear and see and touch him to be sure that he was not. Circle. She hates it when I'm a circle. Because Because why don't I try being a square? Because I'm eccentric. There's no way I could ever be a square. Okay. He had directed in great part the movable embellishments of the 7 chambers upon occasion of this great feat. That it was his own guiding taste which had given character to the masqueraders. Be sure they were grotesque. There were there were much glare and glitter and piquancy and phantasm, much of what has been since seen in Hernani. There were arabesque figures with unsuited limbs and appointments. There were delirious fancies such as the madman fashions. There was much of the beautiful, much of the wanton, much of the bizarre, something of the terrible, and not a little of that which might have excited disgust. To and fro in the 7 chambers there stalked, in fact, a multitude of dreams, and these, the dreams, ride then and about, taking hue from the rooms, and causing the wild music of the orchestra to seem as the echo of their step. And anon there strikes the ebony clock, which stands in the hall of the velvet, and then for a moment all is still, and all is silent save the voice of the clock. The dreams are stiff frozen as they stand, but the echoes of the chime die away. They have endured but an instant, and the light, half subdued, itching nose, analogies. Half subdued laughter floats after them as they depart, and now again the music swells, and the dreams live, and writhes to and fro more merrily than ever, taking hue from the many tinted windows through which stream the rays from the tripods. But to the chamber which lies most westwardly of the 7, there are now none of the maskers who venture, for the night is waning away, and there flows a ruddier light through the blood-colored panes, and the blackness of the sable drapery appalls. And to him whose foot falls upon the sable carpet, there comes from the near clock of ebony a muffled peal more solemnly emphatic than any which reaches their ears, who indulge in the more remote gaieties of the other apartments. But these other apartments were densely crowded, and in them beat feverishly the heart of life, and the revel went whirringly on, until at length there commenced the sounding of midnight upon the clock. And then the music ceased, as I have told, and the evolutions of the waltzers were quieted, and there was an uneasy cessation of all things as before. But now there were 12 strokes to be sounded by the bell of the clock, and thus it happened, perhaps, the more of thought crept, the more of time, into meditations of the thoughtful among those who revelled. And thus, too, it happened, perhaps, that before the last echoes of the last chime had utterly sunk into silence, there were many individuals in the crowd who had found leisure to become aware of the presence of a masked figure, which had arrested the attention of no single individual before. Dan. And the rumor of this new presence having spread itself whisperingly around, there arose at length from the whole company a buzz, or murmur, expressive of disapprobation and surprise. Then finally of terror, of horror, and of disgust. In an assembly of phantasms such as I have painted, it may well be supposed that no ordinary appearance could have excited such sensation. In truth, the masquerade license of the night was nearly unlimited, but the figure in question had out-Heroded Herod, and gone beyond the bounds of even the prince's indefinite decorum. There are chords in the hearts of the most reckless which cannot be touched without emotion. Even with the utterly lost, to whom life and death are equally jests, there are matters of which no jest can be made. The whole company, indeed, seemed now deeply to feel that in the costume and bearing of the stranger neither wit nor propriety existed. The figure was tall and gaunt, and shrouded from head to foot in the habiliments of the grave. The mask which concealed the visage was made so nearly to resemble the countenance of a stiffened corpse, that the closest scrutiny must have been had difficulty in detecting the cheats. And yet all this might have been endured, if not approved, by the mad revelers around. But the mummer had gone so far as to assume the type of the Red Death. His vesture, was dabbled in blood, and his broad brow, with all the features of the face, was besprinkled with the scarlet horror. And the eyes of the Prince Prospero fell upon the spectral image, which with a slow and solemn movement, as if more fully to sustain its role, stalked to and fro among the waltzers. He was seen to be convulsed, in the first moment with a strong shudder, either of terror or distaste, but in the next his brow reddened with rage. Who dares, he demanded hoarsely of the courtiers who stood near him, who dares insult us with this blasphemous mockery? Seize him and unmask him, that we may know whom we have to hang at sunrise from the battlements. It was in the eastern or blue chamber in which stood the Prince Prospero as he uttered these words. They rang throughout the 7 rooms loudly and clearly, for the prince was a bold and robust man, and the music had become hushed at the waving of his hand. It was in the blue room where stood the prince, with a group of pale courtiers by his side. At first, as he spoke, there was a slight rushing movement of this group in the direction of the intruder, who at the moment was also near at hand, and now, with deliberate and stately step, made closer approach to the speaker. But from a certain nameless awe, with which the mad assumptions of the mummer had inspired the whole party, there were found none who put forth hand to seize him, so that, unimpeded, he passed within a yard of the prince's person, and while the vast assembly, as if with one impulse, shrank from the centers of the rooms to the walls, he made his way uninterruptedly, but with the same solemn and measured step which had distinguished him from the first, through the blue chamber to the purple, through the purple to the green, through the green to the orange, through this again to the white, and even thence to the violet, ere a decided movement had been made to arrest him. It was then, however, that the Prince Prospero, maddening with rage and the shame of his own momentary cowardice, rushed hurriedly through the 6 chambers, while none followed him on account of deadly terror that had seized upon all. He bore aloft a drawn dagger and had approached in rapid impetuosity to within 3 or 4 feet of the retreating figure, when the latter, having attained the extremity of the velvet apartment, turned suddenly and confronted his pursuer. There was a sharp cry, and the dagger dropped gleaming upon the sable carpet, upon which, instantly afterwards, fell prostrate, in death, the Prince Prospero. Then, summoning the wild courage of despair, a throng of the revelers at once threw themselves into the black apartment, and seizing the mummer, whose tall figure stood erect and motionless within the shadow of the ebony clock, gasped in unutterable horror at finding the grave cerements and corpse-like mask which they handled with so violent a rudeness, untenanted by any tangible form. And now was acknowledged the presence of the Red Death. He had come like a thief in the night, and one by one dropped the revelers in the blood-bedewed halls of their revel, and died, each in the despairing posture of his fall. And the life of the ebony clock went out, with that of the last of the gay, and the flames of the tripods expired, and darkness and decay, and the Red Death held illimitable dominion over all. So, for those who could not tell, basically, no matter how hard the prince tried to escape the pestilence that had plagued the countryside, death found him. So basically, the lesson in this tale, you cannot escape death. You cannot escape the disease, no matter what you try. Death will find you. And now, on to probably his most well-known tale, The Raven. Oh yeah, Vincent Price did a lot of Edgar Allan Poe stuff, basically. So, The Raven. Alright? Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as of some one gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. "Only this, and nothing more." Ah, distinctly I remember, it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books secrets of sorrow, sorrow for the lost Lenore, for the rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels named Lenore, nameless here for evermore. And the silken, sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain filled me with the fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now, to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This is it, and nothing more." Dan, I will hurt you. Presently my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. Sir, said I, or madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you, ere I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token. And the only word there spoken was the whispered word, Lenore. Thence I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, Lenore. Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning. Soon again I heard a tapping, somewhat louder than before. Surely, said I, surely that this is something at my window lattice. Let me see, then, what thereat is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more. Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mien of lord or lady, perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou, I said, art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven, wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. No, Dan, hush. But the raven, sitting lonely on the placid bust, spoke only that one word, as if his soul, and that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before. Then the bird said, Nevermore. Startled at the stillness broken by reply so aptly spoken, doubtless, said I, what it utters it is only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of nevermore. But the raven still beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of the bird, and burst and bust in door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betoked myself to linking, fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, and ominous bird of yore meant in croaking, Nevermore. This I sat engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eyes now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, on the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplit gloated over, but whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating over, she shall press, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by a seraphim whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite, and nepenthe from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still, if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on the desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore, quoth the raven, Nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we doth adore, tell this soul with sorrow laden if, within the distant Aidenn, it shall clasp a sainted maiden whom the angels name Lenore, clasp a rare and radiant maiden whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, Nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no bleak plume as a token of that lie thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken. Quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door, quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven, never flitting, still is sitting, on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. Sorry. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight over him streaming throws a shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore. And that is the Raven. As I knock over my stuff. And those are the tales I chose to read for this stream. Like I said, I'm kind of going the opposite direction from the H.P. Lovecraft streams, where I kind of started with a longer story, then read a few shorter ones, and now I'm with the Edgar Allen Poe. I'm reading a few shorter ones, and next time I'll read one of his longer stories. It is kind of up to you, chat, because this book has, let's see. The Black Cat is pretty good. That's only 12 pages, but you have The Fall of the House of Usher, which is probably most well known. The Murders in the Rue Morgue, which I don't think many people do know. The Pit and the Pendulum is also in this book as well. So, you also have Ligeia as well. So, figure it out. But, like, you know, one of his longer tales will be the next reading stream, which will be Tuesday. And thank you all for hanging out with me. What's your question, Sonic Jaded? And I'm planning to answer your question, Anthony. I'm planning to live stream tomorrow on my YouTube, Kick, and Twitch. I should have a thumbnail for Borderlands tomorrow evening. As fingers crossed. So I would like to start playing that beginning tomorrow. Sorry, beginning tomorrow evening. Sorry, pickups now. Yep, and possibly Saturday afternoon, as well as even maybe Sunday afternoon, because for the month of okay, I'll answer your question in like a little bit, Sonic. For the month of October, at least, we're taking a break from D&D. And remind me, chat, that I forgot to tell you, like, you know, another part of the D&D story I forgot last night. Because I was so focused on figuring out who was a skinwalker and who wasn't, that I forgot that there was a final part to the D&D story. So remind me tomorrow to tell you that. And as far as the ending to 28 years later, to answer your question, Sonic Jaded, is because it just felt so tonally out of place from everything that came before it. I felt like I was watching a different movie when it happened. It was almost like going from watching an Alfred Hitchcock film to a Benny Hill skit. Nothing against Benny Hill or anything like that, but that was like, you know, just so tonally different. At least the ending was to just about the entirety of the movie. That it took me out of it, basically. Now, maybe the second movie it'll make sense, but that's what I felt when I got to the ending. Like, up to the ending, I was like, you know, fine with the film. I don't like. I still prefer 28 Days Later. I think that's the best of the trilogy. But that's the reason why I had issues with the ending of 28 Years Later. So that's what it feels like to me. Like, you know, you're watching an Alfred Hitchcock film, like Strangers on a Train, for example, and all of a sudden you hear Benny Hill music starting to play. It just doesn't make any sense because it comes out of nowhere. So, but anyway, yes, D&D's lore for wild for me. But anyway, chat. But thank you all for hanging out with me. Like I said, I'm planning on streaming tomorrow. Fingers crossed, it'll be Borderlands. That is the plan. So it'll be my first ever playthrough of the Borderlands games. I don't know if I'll be playing the third one, and I'm definitely waiting for the fourth one to go on sale way down the line. But I'll be like, you know, I'll be playing Borderlands and potentially Borderlands 2 in the near future. So, since we're in October, all the watch parties in October, Trey, will be horror movies. That's the genre for the watch parties in October. We're in October. It's officially, even though it doesn't matter to me if it's spooky season or not, but the fact that we are officially in spooky season, but this month, horror is the genre that we'll be watching for Watch Party. So if you're not into horror, well, then you're gonna have to wait until November and we start doing a mix. So, yeah. So I'll definitely be playing the first two, Soul. I'll definitely be playing the first two. So I'll be starting with the first Borderlands game and then going on to Borderlands 2. So, and again, chat, I do not, expect this, but should you so be inclined, if you donate to my PayPal, what I'm going to use, whatever I earn on PayPal, I'm going to use towards, going goth again. Essentially, going goth again. I'll tell, just to give you an idea of what I'm going to do. It's not going to be like secrets necessarily or anything like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to darken my hair. You see, my natural hair color is a brunette color. But I'm going to darken my hair so it's almost black. And then I'm going to put red highlights through it. Well, Dan, if you donate to my PayPal, and I can go goth, I can maybe get a picture of me doing a handstand. I'm just saying, like, you mentioned that gods love handstands. Well, I mean, there's only one way to really get to that point of proving it, and that is donating. Just saying. Anyway. I'm just saying. I'm just saying. But anyway. So, like, nice. So, what do you mean $500 or no deal? Is that like reference to quartering? No, if someone donates $500, I'll more than be able to, like, go goth. So, I'm just saying. No, like, I'm not paying anyone $500, no. But I'll donate to my PayPal. What's the makeup? Well, you got this. I have purple shades and so forth. I have my black lipstick. So, that'll be the makeup. I have my, this is kind of more of a purplish shade here. This is a more of a maroon shade. It's like dark. So yeah, I'm going, well, I mean, not completely goth. My style, for those, like, you would not know to look at me, chat. Now, but generally, conservative attire, shall we say. I can't speak tonight. Conservative attire was basically mentally beaten into me when I joined the military. So I had to give up my goth/punk look, which was my preference in college, to dress more conservatively while I was in the military. So it kind of became ingrained within me, but now I kind of want to go back a little bit to my actual style, which is a combination of goth/punk. And part of that, it's like, like I say, if you donate to my PayPal, I'm going to use that to go back to a goth hairstyle. I still yell profanities, and I'll be wearing sweaters. We're getting cold. It's going into, like, fall, winter weather, basically. So, but I had to do that. I'll also give you, like, another perspective, chat. What I had to give up, which sounds stupid, but I had to give them up. I used to wear thumb rings, and that was a no-no even in the military. Thumb rings were a no-no. This, no too. But this is my look. This is my style. Anyway, but then there you are with me, hanging out with me. A little bit shorter of a stream, but Edgar Allan Poe is definitely worth a read and a listen. Again, gaming streams, Preferably, well, hopefully tomorrow, but and or Saturday afternoon. Fingers crossed, I'm able to stream Saturday afternoon and then do a watch party, and then hopefully I'll be able to stream Sunday afternoon as well, basically, because I'll have Sundays free pretty much moving forward until we resume playing our tabletop games beginning around early November. So, take care, everyone. Have a good rest of your day or evening, wherever you are in the world, and keep reminding Dan that if he wants the goth handstands, to donate. Take care, everyone. Good night and peace. Quoth the Raven, Nevermore.